if you're not creating the habits that you need for your life now, it's not going to happen, and you're not setting yourself up for success. So, for myself, I keyed in on muscle mass being a really important part of my longevity because I'm a super active person and I want to stay that way for as long as possible. I need to be working on that, building that framework now, so that when I'm 95, 100, it's there for me to use.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. I hope everybody is doing great. Thank you all for your continued support of the show. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit follow or subscribe if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Check out the show notes, pick up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious. I will mail it, sign it to you myself. I want to dive right in today because I have a very special episode with two incredible guests. I'm going to breeze through their bios because they both had all the details out there that you can know. So let me start off. I have Tyler Wozny. He's a seasoned executive and entrepreneur with over 2 decades of experience in technology, e-com, and startups of all flavors. Originally from Vancouver, his career has evolved from driving innovation in e-commerce to building brick-and-mortar men's health clinics, where he helps men achieve the maximum potential. A passionate advocate for men's health, he combines his professional expertise with a personal commitment to wellness. I also have Dr. Haleem Mohammed, born in India, raised in Brooklyn, and now a resident of Miami Beach. Dr. Hal is a board-certified, award-winning internal medicine physician. He was voted class representative and awarded Resident of the Year during his medical training. Dr. Hal also holds an MBA from the University of Massachusetts. Currently, his focus is growth and success of GameDay men's health clinics, which specialize in physician-led concierge men's health. With award-winning clinics already established in Aventura, Boca, and Weston, Dr. Hal is leading the charge on expanding the services throughout Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
You got it.
Pleasure's all ours.
You got it. You guys have incredible bios, and I apologize if I missed some important details there because, Hal, I'm still looking at yours. I see you're a terrible golfer and pickleball player. You really gave me all the details, and well, I'm sure we're going to dive into them on today's episode. But I want to call out, before we had met, or actually right before this phone call, 2 things stuck out to me. Hal, you mentioned that you went to med school like a good Indian boy. And so we're going to be diving into that because, even though you took the traditional route from a education perspective, you took, the more unorthodox route with regards to how to apply what it is that you came out of school with. And the other thing we're going to dive into here is a keyword that's come up now on several episodes of this podcast: longevity. And that seems to be the bond that brought you both together. So, first things first, let's give the audience a little bit of glimpse into both of you individually and how it came to be that the focus of longevity is now driving not only your careers, but really your purpose here. Hal, you mentioned to me before we got on, at this stage in the game, you've accomplished so much professionally. It's not really about the dollars that are coming in. At this point, there's a grander purpose that you're serving here. So let me start out with you. Talk to me a little bit about life post-medicine, med school in particular, and how you came to be where you are today with the focus on GameDay and the other initiatives that are really driving your day-to-day now.
Sure. So, getting out of med school, getting into residency, that was, the goal during that time. It was get into med school, get into residency, finish residency, be the best doctor that you can possibly be. My goal was always administration plus medicine. So it was, hospital medicine, clinic medicine. I wanted to be medical director, regional medical director, chief medical officer. You hit all those points in your life where you're like, okay, this is it. Okay, this is it. And you forget about your health while you're doing all of that. And so I got to a point where I was, I want to say 240 to 250 pounds, and it became, really apparent that at my early 40s, I was probably going to die young. I had, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, issues with just different things that happen to guys when you gain that kind of weight, whether it's erectile dysfunction or low testosterone, and things that guys don't really talk about, right? So you have 40% of guys over the age of 45 in the United States have low testosterone, and then 52% of males at any given point will have erectile dysfunction. So pretty much all of us are going to have it at one point or the other. And I get to that point where my wife says, "Hey, I want to have a baby," and if we have a baby, are you going to be around for this kid? And it was like a light switch in my head that there is a greater purpose. It's not just about me and her. It's I need to be there for my child. So now I have this baby. I lose the weight. I get my stuff together, have the baby, and I realize it's not career anymore. It's more about being around for him, being a dad, and being the healthiest possible version of myself for this tiny human being that relies on me. And that's where I think most of my purpose comes from.
You bring up an interesting point, and and I don't, I kind of made the joke earlier about being a good Indian boy because that's what you referred to, but the truth of the matter is, in a lot of immigrant communities, there's a lot of push to go down this route, and similar to you, a lot of times you find the people who are in healthcare. The ones that take care of themselves the least, especially the ones that are coming out of med school, in residency in those early years, and, as someone who, now takes care of themselves, I find it hard to take, the word of some of these physicians at these early stages, because I don't see them applying, what they're saying. And then, I will say someone like me, then all of a sudden hears about someone like Peter Attia and picks up his book and starts reading and then being like, why aren't doctors saying this to me in real life? Um, and I see your face kind of reacting to what I'm saying, and maybe you can help the audience bridge the gap a little bit here. But help us understand, is there any hope to bridge this gap? Between what we're seeing from some of these younger people in the medical profession, and now what we're reading and kind of having to find out on our own.
So the average primary care doctor has 5 to 15 minutes with you at each visit. They've got to see about 25 patients to hit their metrics, keep the lights on for the larger organizations that they're working for. So there's no time for that. So and then nutrition is taught in a couple of classes during med school. Longevity is not a thing. That's not something that's something recently that came up. If you're talking about Atia, who I think is spectacular, I think his teaching is amazing. Atia reaches for that top 1 to 10% of folks out there. What we're trying to do is hit the 80% of guys. I forget if it was him who said it. Let's minor in the minors and major in the majors. Let's work on exercise, diet, reducing stress, making sure that you have good sleep, and then we can work on optimizing and getting that extra percentage points that you need. So it's a different philosophy. I think what GameDay is trying to go after. We're for every man, whereas someone like Dr. Atia, Dr. Huberman, those guys are really they work for some of the elite, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, no, thanks for clearing that up. Tyler, I want to make sure that we get some background on you, with regards to your own longevity journey. And what we're going to do eventually is kind of talk about how you two came together. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I am that everyman. I'm not a medical professional. If you asked me anything medical 10 years ago, I didn't know anything. And what I did know is that, waking up on my 30th birthday, I'm now 40, that I felt tired. I didn't feel like I had the body that was going to take me to 100 or even 120. I was getting sick all the time. My immune system was a mess. And I had no direction on how to fit that. I thought I lived a pretty healthy lifestyle, but I wasn't actually doing the things that a guy has to do as he ages in order to feel and perform and look the way I wanted to. And so I went on my own journey. It started at my primary care physician. You can imagine, echoing what Hal said. The advice was, get more sleep and drink some water. there was nothing I was really going to be able to do with that. They saw me for 5 minutes and then they moved on. Like that was it. I realized they were great if I had an STD or if I had a broken leg or whatever. But if I was going to be focusing on my health span versus just my lifespan, quoting Atia, that wasn't going to be my path. And so I went in search for medical professionals that could help me achieve what I wanted to achieve. And the crazy part of it was like, there was nothing available. Like there was nothing easily um, searchable, or I had to ask a friend of a friend of a friend. I ended up at the back room of the gym, which is never a good place to be, and I was sort of like, this is crazy. Like it's too much for me, and or rather, it's not good enough for me. Like where's this stuff coming from, and what is it, and what's the effects? Like it's not the right way to do it. And so, luckily I ended up meeting a medical professional based out of Arizona, actually, who helped me get my start. And then when I was introduced to Evan at GameDay and then eventually Hal, it was like a 2x4 to the head, where I was like, oh my gosh, if every guy could and every guy should have access to something like this as a complement to what they're already doing, we can help guys look, feel, and perform their best as they age across the country. And so it was just a massive inspiration moment. I left the world of tech and e-commerce and entered the world of medical. And, I'm very fortunate to work with folks like Hal, who bring that amazing medical expertise. And then what I think I bring to the table is like the patient's perspective. Like I am that guy. I've gone through that journey, and I talk to guys every day about, stuff that's holding them back, both physically and mentally. And we want to give them the edge to change that.
For contextual purposes, you both look great right now, right? You guys both like spry young men. I mean, I know how you mentioned you were in your 40s. I don't know how old you are, but you look super young today. And so for context for the listeners, I do want to kind of let them in on, back prior to these moments of realization, are there any habits that you could speak to, whether you guys were, overindulging in food, not the right foods, whether you weren't eating well, whether you were drinking a lot, whether you weren't sleeping, whether you weren't exercising, just so we kind of get a sense of what brought you to where you were, when you kind of hit that low point?
So in residency, and you mentioned doctors, the rewards that we have are food. That's it. That's we're working. There's a joke in one of my friend groups, physician friend groups, that someone says, "Oh, I worked 80 hours this week," and the other guy will say, "Oh, so part time?" Because that's really what it feels like sometimes. And so our rewards are food, and we would go after the high carb, high fat, high sugar, processed, all that stuff. So pizza was a regular thing. I think I would have a couple of slices of cake from the hospital cafeteria on a regular basis. And I always would, sort of justify it in my head as I deserve this because I'm working so hard or whatever have you. And then you feel worse and worse and worse because of the food that you're eating, and it sort of just spirals from there. And if you add up an extra 500 calories throughout the course of a year, you're adding some significant poundage. So that I think was definitely how I got there. The lack of sleep, obviously, in medicine is a real thing, and now with my 13-month-old, it's happening again. So, and sleep is one of those things that there's a bank. You have to continuously deposit sleep in, and if you're not getting that sleep, you have to make it up. You can't sleep 6 hours every night and then sleep 10 hours one night and make up for it. It just doesn't work that way. You've got to get consistent, regular sleep. And that's something that I think is super important that we don't realize as medical professionals how much we're lacking. But yeah, those are a couple of big points there that
How about you,
I think
Tyler?
people need to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think so many Americans especially are like taking a pause right now and like wondering what it is that's making them feel this way. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to get all conspiracy theory on us, but like the food that we're eating and like, so here's one thing that I changed over the last few years. When I go to the grocery store, I only shop the perimeter now. I'm hitting vegetables, I'm hitting fruits, I'm getting my eggs, and I'm getting my meats, and then I'm checking out. It's all the middle bits that where there's ultra processed foods, stuff that just is new to our diet over the last decade or two, and is causing these massive obesity epidemics. And for myself, like I'm kind of a scrawny guy by nature, and so I was never overweight, but like I would call myself skinny fat for sure, with the food that I was eating, and constantly looking at my phone, and getting trapped in the doom scrolling, what my husband calls it, and so it's like these macro factors that are affecting us that, I think when I started this journey, like my testosterone levels naturally were just like super low. And I think that was contributing to my lack of energy and my lack of ability to build muscle mass. Interestingly, now that I have a whole food diet, that I, steam every morning, I work out 5 to 7 days a week, combination of HIIT and yoga and lifting weights. So like all of those habits have changed for me, and my natural testosterone levels have actually increased dramatically, especially for a 40-year-old. But I still also supplement with other services that GameDay provides in order to continue to help me live the way I want to live. Like on Saturday morning, I want to wake up and do my berries boot camp. I want to go play beach volleyball if I'm in Miami, not New York right now. If I'm in Miami, I want to go for a bike ride up to Holliver Inlet and have a sit in the sun, and like I don't want to feel tired while I'm doing that. I want to be excited about it, and I want to feel energized, and what GameDay does helps our guys do that.
Wow, that was really, informative. Dr. Hal, talk to me a little bit about what we should be looking at in terms of metabolic signals, especially at a younger age. Think about, the younger 30s. What should we be keeping an eye out for? And kind of, you may think everything's okay, but it's really not.
Well, it's like, when you start to notice the decline, at age 30, you're gonna see anywhere from a 1 to 2% decline in your testosterone levels, and when the first question I ask most of our patients is, "Hey, tell me what you know about testosterone." And they're invariably gonna tell me it has to do with sex and muscle. I don't wanna be a musclehead and everything works fine down there, because even though, 5 out of 10 guys have erectile dysfunction, if you ask 10 guys, nobody has erectile dysfunction. So but there is a significant decline, and it starts to decline 1 to 2% a year, and then it accelerates at age 40. And there's testosterone receptors everywhere. There's testosterone receptors in your heart. This whole misconception of testosterone replacement therapy causing heart issues, it comes from improper use. It comes from going to these back alleys and shady places that the folks are pumping themselves up of illegal steroids, and then even using testosterone, which is an amazing medication, but using it incorrectly. So I always go back to, guys, we're going to treat folks that have low testosterone and testosterone deficiency. So hypogonadal men, not guys that are coming in looking for a cheat code or a boost. It's more if you actually have a condition, and we're going to treat that condition. Prior to getting involved with GameDay, it was as an internist. If you asked me about testosterone, I very rudimentary, very whatever I read, and didn't really deal with it too much. As we're starting to see more and more, thousands of patients across the country, I realized that it really is a problem in the United States. There's a 20 to 30% decline in testosterone levels over the last 20 to 30 years. And the range that we're giving these guys, based on, it's really based on insurance companies, because they will only cover it if you're below a certain point, and it's that point is like in the 200-300 range total testosterone, and then the range goes from 2 to 300 all the way up to 1,000, 1,200 or so. Anything higher than that is dangerous. Anything lower than that really is dangerous as well. But the average guy coming in is sometimes sitting lower than that, or they're in the 200-300 range, and then you check their free testosterone, which is the real one, the one the important one. Sorry, not the real one, but the important one, because that's the one that's bioactive. That's the one that's available for your receptors, and we're finding that that's abnormally low in a lot of guys. And that's something that I was really surprised to hear, because we we don't realize how much that affects day-to-day life, and how much, what I'll echo what Tyler says. I'm able to see, 20, 40 patients a day, and then chase after my kid. And he doesn't care if I'm tired. You've got to do, you mentioned you have two children. Kids don't care. I mean, you've got to chase after them. You got to play with them, and they're going to go to bed when they go to bed, and they're going to wake up when they wake up, and you have to be, available. So, that's something that I think is really important to me. So,
You brought up TRT, and I want to ask about that because not an area of expertise for me, but I recently came across a little clip from Joe Rogan and he was talking about it. And he said something very similar to what you said around the fact that most people who are doing it aren't doing it properly. And one of the things that I've noticed, say over the last 3 to 6 months in particular, and maybe this is the algorithm, this is something that's been coming up on my feed a lot, but mostly from, bigger fitness influencers, people who are in, tremendous shape, and generally people who are, let's call it 50 to 100 pounds heavier than I am in muscle. Um, and so my question to either of you is, I don't know if the word stigma is correct. Maybe it is correct. What are you doing, whether it's through GameDay or through your individual, platforms, to help open this up so the conversation is easier for someone who doesn't look like a Joe Rogan or who isn't, a UFC buff or isn't a big fitness influencer? I listen, I hear it, and in the back of my mind, I'm saying this is important. Maybe I should know what my levels are, but I also feel great, and I don't really think there's a problem.
So I think that is there's specific symptoms and there's non-specific symptoms, and usually guys that are walking around feeling fatigue is really a non-specific symptom of low testosterone. Libido and lack of being able to gain muscle, those are specific symptoms. Now if you have more specific, like gynecomastia or lack of body hair, small testicles from when you were younger, those are very specific signs of low testosterone. But there's a huge subset of guys that are walking around that just aren't feeling great, that have brain fog, that aren't energetic the way that they were. They're sleeping poorly. They're having issues with their wives. They're not chasing after their kids. Those are guys that may not know that it's because of testosterone. And those are the guys that, we want to be able to help. And we've had numerous occasions where the wives have come back in after we've treated the guys. And I've had wives in our clinics actually in tears thanking us of the difference between what their husband before and after coming to game day. Then they tell us, I got my husband back. I got my marriage back. And that to me is like, I literally have goosebumps right now just telling that story because it happens over and over.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, and I got a couple thoughts on this. I mean, what makes game day different and why I think both Hal and I really appreciate it is because of the medical rigor that we put into what we do, um, and the level of access. I think it's shocking how many guys walk in our door and say, I was curious what my levels were, and actually my primary care physician wouldn't tell me. Like they wouldn't test me for it, even though I'm mid 40s. They said I'm fine. And like to me, as someone who like thrives off of knowledge and wants to learn more about my body and truly believes that um, that I need to take control of my health because no one else is going to, like, having access to that information is critical. So we believe at Game Day that every guy has the right to know his numbers, which is why every guy can come in and get a complimentary testosterone test. We have an in-house lab. This is something that very few places have. It's actually very complex. But within a guy's first appointment, we're able to get those testosterone levels and give him awareness of it. If he can walk right out the door and if he has a smile on his face saying, I learned something today, that's like a huge win for us because we know he's going to tell his friends about game day and, what a great experience he has. So we're all about access and we're all about knowledge and education. I think the other piece there is a lot of guys come to us as kind of what you said, like they're not sure what's going on with them, but they haven't been able to get help from their primary care physician. A lot of the guys we help don't have primary care physicians, and we're often their first stop. And so I can't tell you the number of guys that have come in that really just needed that first start and that first education as to like what their blood work is, why it's important to do. Let's get that initial panel done, and then we refer them out to the right people depending on kind of what those issues are, or we help them if it's within our lane. But having a place where guys feel comfortable. Game days are set up so that they do not look like medical facilities. They look like a man cave in a way, like, plush leather chairs. We got the TVs going. We got UFC or tennis playing on the TVs and, everyone's chit chatting. We got good coffee and, It's just a fun place to be where guys can feel comfortable talking about their health and talking to other guys about what they're experiencing. So it's just a totally new way of thinking about men's health and bringing it to the masses so that, to your point earlier, like we reduce that stigma because it is real. Guys haven't traditionally talked about their health.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, it's a real concierge style practice of medicine.
well, that was my next question. There's a lot of concierge styles of medicine coming out now, right? And it's like, again, from someone who's not a physician, who's not in the medical field. I was actually just speaking to an anesthesiologist a couple days ago, who was one of the top anesthesiologists at NYU. He just up and left, moved out to Eastern Long Island, and is opening up his own concierge medical practice out there because, similar to you all, he actually kind of had a very similar awakening around the birth of his child. And I think for educational purposes, can you kind of give us some insight into how GameDay differentiates itself? Now that concierge medicine is something that's sprouting up in all different places.
Well, I mean, first of all, we're the largest men's health network in the country. There's almost 300 locations that are open, I think, today, and there's another 700 or so that should be coming online. None of the clinicians, none of the physicians operate in a vacuum. We talk on a regular basis. I actually sit on the medical advisory board for GameDay Men's Health, and there's about 10 of us that are all boarded physicians that have been in practice for quite some time. So it's not just a concierge doc, who I think is amazing when concierge docs do that, but it's not me going, hey, I'm Dr. Hal, here's my medical license, and I'm going to open up my concierge practice, and that's it. We hold each other accountable. We follow guideline based medicine. If we get out of our lane, we know who to refer to, and it's usually academic urology or academic endocrinology. So that's a huge difference there. The training is pretty rigorous, and it's continuous because we continue. It's not official CME, but we're constantly in contact and discussing different scenarios without violating HIPAA or anything like that. So yeah, I think that's a major difference. So while there are other forms of concierge medicine out there, I don't think we have something that's so physician driven. Evan's a huge believer in take care of the patient first, and everything else will sort of fall in line. And we're very patient centric when it comes to that.
Outside of coastal cities like New York, Florida, I don't know if you guys are on the West Coast right now. Talk to me about middle America a little bit more so. I think this story hasn't really resonated as much yet, with middle America. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the sense that I'm getting.
Some of the most successful game day clinics are actually in smaller Midwest towns, and they're absolutely crushing it because there's a huge need out there. If you look at primary care physicians, specialists in Middle America, I mean, we all congregate to the larger cities, the coastal cities. Every doctor wants to live in Miami, work in Miami. This was one of my dreams. Hey, I wanted to move to Miami as soon as finish residency and all that. So we all tend to congregate in these areas, and then there's a real need in those other areas. I worked in rural medicine for a while, where I was the only doctor in the hospital besides the ER doc, and there was nobody else around. The closest subspecialist was 30 miles away. You had to go by helicopter if something happened. So I was practicing at the tip of my license, and there is a huge need. So I think folks are starting to realize that. And then the one thing we get a lot of is, are you expensive? Is it expensive? And I look at some of the premiums that we pay for insurance, and the deductibles that people have. I think between my wife, me, and my kid, we're probably paying $12,000-15,000 in premiums, and then the deductibles are something insane, something like $6,000 or $10,000. I don't think any of our services even approach that. Most direct physician or direct patient care practices are going to be much less than that per on a monthly basis. So you still keep your insurance, and you have your primary care doctor, but then this is something where I don't mind seeing a game day patient 2-3 times in a week if I need to make adjustments or anything like that. There are guys that come in on a weekly basis. There are guys that come in twice a week, and sometimes it's just to shoot the shit or actually get medical care, and that's the difference between concierge practice or a clinical practice that needs to see 25 patients. Otherwise, they're going to have to close their doors.
Well, now I'm going to ask a very difficult question to either one of you who wants to answer. When I think about what's happening right now, I'm 37 years old for context. And I'm now in a place I never thought I would be, where I am willing to pay a lot more money than I was ever willing to pay to see a doctor such as yourself, Dr. Hal, or something similar, depending on what my use case is, regularly. Whereas, coming out of college 15 years ago, I thought I was never going to pay more than my health insurance, to take care of my needs. And I was raised like you both, probably believing that just going to do my annual physical, checking out those results. And I had a medical background. I had leukemia as a child, and I had a brain surgery when I was 13 years old. So it's not like I didn't have, a serious medical background. I did, but I was raised to believe this is the way that it should be done. My annual physical, my blood labs, my results. If my doctor gives me the green light every September, then I'm good to go. And now I'm in the healthiest shape of my life, but now I'm more inclined to see someone such as yourself and to come in regularly, even though I don't feel like there's a problem. And this is a long-winded way of asking to either one of you, what is the future as it pertains to healthcare? Let's call it in our country. Give me, how you think things are going to look 10 years from now based on what you guys are building today.
I mean, I had a guy who came in yesterday, and when I explained to him, "Oh, we don't, we don't take insurance. We're cash pay." He's like, "Oh, thank God! Everything that I do through insurance is terrible, and everything that I pay for is awesome." And it kind of it shook me a little bit, just because it was such a clear point of view that he had come to, and he's an older gentleman, and that feels like where it's going. I mean, Dr. Howe, you talk a lot about insurance in so many ways being a scam. And I think more and more people are going to come to some sort of conclusion that that is the case. And there's some interesting regulatory, environments in New York State, for example, that we deal with where, for example, when we get our full lab draws, we use a reputable lab for that, and according to New York law, it has to be patient pay. We cannot have the lab charge us and then charge the patient for it, and it ends up being just a lot more expensive. So anytime insurance involves, it ends up being just a lot more expensive for everyone instead of going direct. And so I think the future is cash pay in a lot of ways. Unless you have a super extreme condition, for your everyday health and continuing to feel that way, it's going to be cash pay.
Well, you have car insurance. Do you use your car insurance to change your oil? So then, I mean, why would you use insurance monies to deal with primary care? I think that you have primary care is falling apart in the United States because there's so much in between. Yesterday, my wife shows me a bill. She actually stayed home so that she could catch up with some of her in basket. And I said, so you took a day off to do work that you're not able to do while you're at work. Great. First problem. Second thing is she hands me a bill and says, oh, by the way, we owe $700 to one of the doctors that we saw when we had the baby. And I said, well, this bill is like from last year. What happened here? She was like, well, we've been kind of kicking it back and forth because you have the secondary insurance that tells me I got to talk to the primary insurance, and the primary insurance says, well, this should be covered by the secondary insurance, and then the pediatrician's office says, well, you got to deal with the insurance and then let us know who's going to pay for it. So my wife, who's a physician, who's a brilliant, probably the smartest physician I know, it just looks at me and is like, should I just pay it?
Which we all
And I'm
find
like,
ourselves in.
I think that is exactly what they want you to do. so you just pay it and that's it. And who wins is, the insurance company. And the insurance company is there to make money for their shareholders. That's their primary job. It's not health insurance is not health care. And that's the mistake that we have perpetuated throughout, since I wasn't born here, but I was raised here, and I see like that's sort of the expectation. Guys come in and they're like, well, I have health insurance. That doesn't equate health care. So I think we're going away from that. I'm never going to charge $250,000 a year like some of our esteemed physicians do. But I think there is there's a good medium there of tiers of medicine that you should be able to access. And there's plenty of direct primary care docs that charge $50 a month and tell you to hold on to your catastrophic insurance, which, by the way, you can't even find those like catastrophic Cadillac plans or anything like that anymore. But there should be those things where if I just had surgery that would have cost 30, 40, $50,000. That's what insurance is for, not for my follow up with my primary care doctor. And that's where I think healthcare should go to. So I don't necessarily think that insurance is a scam. I think that it has its purpose. We're just using it incorrectly.
There's a great book called The Price We Pay by Marty Macri. I don't know if you've read it. And one thing that struck me is that as a Canadian who comes from socialized healthcare to now the US, which is a very different system, what really struck me was the lack of transparency around pricing. And that's something that we really pride ourselves on. When guys walk in the door, like if they ask us how much something is, we will tell them we have a price. You walk into the hospital, like no one knows how much anything is going to cost, and you just get this random bill, and it just it becomes like in the book he talks about if you have something that's not life threatening like a broken arm and you don't have insurance, the best thing to do is shop around. Like you with a broken arm, give a call to 6 different hospitals and ask them how much they're going to charge, and it's insane. And so, pricing transparency, I think, is the future. And, I think that has to come from like regulation change in order to make sure that happens for the consumer.
It's
You're
really
so right.
embarrassing that physicians are not able to answer that question, by the way, because
Totally.
out of the 4 or 5 trillion I think we're going to hit in healthcare expenditure this or in 2024 or 2025 in the United States, I think it's some ridiculous number like 5 trillion. It's either 4.9 or 5 trillion. 93% of that goes to other things besides healthcare, and it's that's absolute insanity to me.
If you know me, you know that I like to look good and feel good. As an endurance athlete who trains daily, I need my wardrobe to fit the mold. Roan creates performance-driven clothing for your active lifestyle. Each piece is designed for versatility and made with integrity to outfit you for an active life lived on your own terms. The Roan promise is to help you move forever forward. Use code MILE40 for 20% off online and in-store for new customers only. Visit www.rhone.com, that's Rhone spelled RHONE, or find your local store and move forever forward starting today. Yeah. I mean, look, we could talk about this for days and days and days. And I have so many opinions. And I think it was, and I don't want to misquote, but I believe it was, the interim CEO for United Healthcare who came in and, he said, look, no doubt the system's been broken, right? Like it's been decades upon decades of making it worse and worse. And, I try to hold out hope because to your point, Tyler, I've now 2 kids in the last 3 years. I have no idea what bill is coming my way. I mean, fortunately, I've been able to pay them, but literally, like you could send me a bill for $20,000 and I wouldn't be able to question it because I wouldn't know how to. And not everybody has the background like Dr. Hal and your wife, who could actually understand the system and the way that it works. And no one really has the time at this point because
Totally.
the system is so convoluted to
Totally.
really figure it out. It's it feels like it's designed this way on purpose, and we can.
I did want to
Yeah.
throw in a correction. It's 97% of healthcare dollars are spent fixing problems and only 3% preventing them. And it's 7% of healthcare dollars are spent on physicians. So, doctors are not the problem. And it's preventive care that we need to be doing, and we're not doing enough of that.
I'm going to take this in a different way. There's 2 things I want to get to. First, I want to talk to you about just the journey with GameDay Health, and I want to uncover, what potential obstacles and roadblocks you guys have faced along the way, whether it was from a business perspective or just, any sort of pushback with regards to, what it is that you're building out there. And I think that let's start there. So talk to me about, the business journey. Dr. Hal, you were involved in GameDay Health longer than Tyler, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how many years have you been around now?
So we just opened last year. So the clinic, the first clinic is as old as my baby, so 13 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was born a week after the clinic opened. So
How long did it take to go from concept to, an open clinic?
we 60 days.
Okay. Wow, that's
Yeah,
quick.
from when we signed the lease, it was 60 days. Yeah. So, but we were the fastest to open on the East Coast, and the first to open on the East Coast, and the fastest to open in the franchise history.
Okay. So now,
Mine was 6 months to give you some context. So,
wow.
Hallam team, they really crushed it. Yeah.
All right. So look, if you're looking at this from a SWOT analysis perspective in those 60 days before you open up, what's your biggest threat at that point?
We're fighting against the interesting thing about GameDay is there's just not a lot of direct competition. There's a couple, you know, like you said, concierge medicine places. Most of those, especially in where I'm in New York City, are very expensive. Like 10x the price. It's really for the guys that are making $2 million a year and above kind of thing. And then there's primary care, and we sit really kind of in the middle of that. And so I think our biggest threat is not competition, but it's obscurity. We need to let guys know that we exist, and let them know that, hey, it's actually okay to talk about your health, and this is like a great opportunity for you to live and perform and feel the way you want to. And so we spend a ton of our time meeting with other businesses, meeting with other medical professionals, everything that we can to make sure that folks know that we exist, because as guys age, they start to realize that this is something that they need in their lives.
I mean, from a medical perspective, I would say it's the misinformation and the practitioners that are out of scope. Whether it's aesthetic med spas that are dabbling in hormonal health, which is a little scary to me, or the folks that shouldn't be in this space at all, and that becomes very apparent when we start to see those patients start to feel, hey, maybe these people don't know what they're doing, and then they come to us and they see how things are supposed to be done. So I do a lot of education, and a lot of that education is actually directed towards folks that are out of scope, just to make sure that everyone is doing this correctly. So for my thing is, I don't mind competition, welcome it. I think the more we talk about it, the more stigma goes away, and the more what ends up happening when you educate more and more, there's more dollars that are spent for research, and then you have better and faster and different modalities and therapies that come up, and it benefits everyone. It benefits the patients, benefits the doctors, the whole nine. So I don't mind that. What I do mind is when folks are out of scope, and that's something that is pretty scary to me. That's something that actually keeps me up at night. If you look at some of my tweets, they're at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's talking about that after dealing with the baby, and then I'm worried about if someone's going to hurt someone doing it incorrectly. So
Well, to that point, this is more for my educational purposes and probably for the listeners as well. When you think about different industries, generally don't like to see change, right? Like even in corporate industries, when you think about digital transformation, even though it makes so much sense sometimes, a lot of people are used to just using their notebooks and or their laptops, and they don't necessarily want to move into the wave of the future. Um, is that a similar situation in your field? Like, is there a field of traditional medicine that's like pushing back against initiatives like yours?
yes, I mean, number one, my wife, she was like, wait a second, so you're going to do testosterone replacement therapy, erectile dysfunction? I mean, it doesn't not is not going to increase like heart attack risk? Isn't that going to cause strokes? Isn't that's going to it's going to be dangerous. And then we looked at the studies, and we looked at newer studies, and we look at there's a the Traverse trial that's coming out. That's probably the largest trial that was done on cardiovascular disease risk factors and risks with testosterone replacement therapy. And what they found is that if you treat guys that have low testosterone and testosterone deficiency and keep them in a therapeutic range, it's actually safer. It's dangerous being subtherapeutic. It's dangerous being super therapeutic. And my patients' eyes gloss over when I start explaining how elastin and collagen is affected in the subendothelium of your arteries and veins, which are the walls of your blood vessels that are made up. And the super therapeutic levels will degrade elastin and collagen, and that's where your tensile strength, elasticity comes into play. And those are the guys that my ER buddies see in the emergency room with aortic dissections and strokes and heart attacks, and they check their testosterone levels, and they're sitting in the 2000 range because they went to a med spa and saw someone that doesn't know what they're doing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So go
And
ahead, Tyler.
I think it would be remiss for us not to mention some of the online only folks. There's the Hims, there's the Hone Health, there's Henry. If you even mention the word, you start getting a million ads on Instagram for them.
Yeah,
Bishoy,
thanks,
sounds like
Tyler.
Is,
it's yeah,
wait,
it sounds like
is Hims those
you're in
pills?
that cohort. Yeah. So Hims
Yeah,
has
I've been
Hims
getting
has all.
blasted by them.
Yeah, you get blasted, and you know, we're not in the business of bashing. That said, in-person medical care, especially when it comes to something as important as your hormones, I personally, as a patient, would never work with an online only person. I want to be able to meet in person with my practitioner and my clinician
Well,
and
there's also
be able to
continuity of
communicate
care.
with them.
If you look
Totally.
at,
And so we
there's no
see a lot of
continuity
guys
of
come
care
in
when you have
here
that.
who started with an online company, and then they were just sort of forgotten, and they never redid their blood work. They never went for any checkups, and they came into us to House Point and are outside of those therapeutic levels, and they're feeling wonky. And so we sort them out. And so I think the GameDay difference, to talk about your question earlier, is that in-person care where guys feel comfortable, of course, but that truly in-person care where your clinician, you can call them up and ask them by name and have a conversation and make sure what we're prescribing is having the effect that we want it to.
Got it. Tyler, this question is directed at you. Given your background professionally, and now you're in this space, a space that maybe you didn't necessarily see yourself going into. We do have a lot of founders, co-founders that come onto this show, a lot of business partners and executives that come onto this show and talk about their journey there. I take it from the way things are going that this was a good decision on your part. However, maybe give us some insight there with regards to making that pivot and what it's
Hmm.
done for you as a business leader.
Yeah. So, uh, coming from building software to working in the real world, working with atoms is a lot harder than working with electrons. I can tell you that. Like, when we make a decision for one of their clinic build outs, it's a decision because it's made in concrete or drywall or wood or something. Whereas, when we made a mistake with software, it's like, oh, just roll roll the release back, no problem. So I think that's been a real wake up call for me professionally and personally, that what we're doing here, in a lot of ways is a lot harder than working in the digital world. Um, but, all in all, like, I think for myself, spending, 10 years in technology, it was so rewarding. And there's something really magical about building something and then having millions of people use it overnight, and having that sort of that type of connection. For me personally, I love shaking the hand of a patient. I love having a conversation and hearing what their story is. It's totally exactly the same as what you're doing with us right now. Like, I'm out in our reception area every day, like just getting to know our guys and hearing their story, it gives me a whole other level of joy to be able to work with folks one on one, work with a team of medical professionals who I respect greatly, and I'm so thankful that they're part of the team, such that I personally can rely on them for my own personal benefit, and being able to give that type of service and that type of medical expertise to our patients. So it's been super rewarding, super hard, but super rewarding.
That's awesome to hear. As we close things out, there's one question that I always love to ask, and I always kind of keep the last question a little bit difficult to answer. But when we think about the overall theme of longevity, there's a lot of factors at play here, right? Like it's not just about the result. It's not just about the immediate impact. Yes, there's a big piece of this, Dr. Hal, you mentioned to it earlier. And I think, most listeners can agree to this. We all want to be healthy enough for our children to be able to run around with them and to be there for them. But when you think about longevity in our later years, it's something that historically, we haven't been trained to understand how to handle, right? Like we anticipated our life, like if you look at the lifespan here in America, and I haven't checked it recently, and Dr. Halm, you may have the statistics. What's the average lifespan for a male right now?
74 years old.
Okay.
So at 37, you're middle aged.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
It's wild. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
You just gave me some goosebumps. But yeah, that's
Yeah,
wild.
seriously.
That's wild. But, to your point, I was and, I'm sure if I were to ask my parents, who thankfully are still with us, they probably anticipate, somewhere between 70 and 80 as being, the end of life, period. Um, are we equipped to handle living longer as a society at this point?
I think if we live quality years, yes. I think the mistake that we're making is so, I mean, spiritually, religiously, I think we have a lifespan that we have, and that's it. That was written, in my head. That's already done. Now, how do I live that with purpose, with quality, so that my kid isn't, wiping my butt at 74 years old, right? That I'm still out and running around with him and maybe his kid. That's the difference I think we need to get to, and so I think we are equipped for it if we work on it. Otherwise it's like in the hospital system. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And then you see all these folks in ICUs with without DNR orders, and they're plugged in and they've got a tube down their throat. And is that life, or is that just prolonging death? So I think if we can extend lifespan, then absolutely. But I think we got to do it the right way.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
Same to you, Tyler.
I'll add that. Yeah, I'll add just that. Um, to your point about 37 being middle age, like if you're not if you're not creating the habits that you need for your life now, it's not going to happen, and you're not setting yourself up for success. So, for myself, I keyed in on muscle mass being a really important part of my longevity because I'm a super active person and I want to stay that way for as long as possible. I need to be working on that, building that, building that framework now, so that when I'm 95, 100, it's there for me to use, right? And so that's why we see so many guys in their 30s and 40s coming into game day, because they're getting that same message that I need to make those changes now, and I need to make those habits concrete now in order for me to create that longevity experience that I want to have.
Well, your answers just made me want to ask you another question, which I think is important. What's the oldest age you've seen walk into the clinic?
My oldest patient I've seen was 86. Uh, he was fantastic, like such a bright light of life. But the gentleman needed some help with his performance in the bedroom at night, and so we were there making it happen. And he actually came
Was
in
not
multiple
expecting
weeks.
that. Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, multiple weeks after coming in, and he gave me a big hug, and he's like, you changed my life." And if we can change the life of an 86-year-old, like what a dream. That gives me goosebumps. That helps me remember why I did this to start.
Dr. Hal, you want to add anything to that? Whether it's, the oldest patient that you've seen, or more so how you have that conversation with that patient who is perhaps in their older years, especially someone, it's awesome that they even made it into your clinic at that point. At that point, that says something. But there's a lot of people who are, in that age range, whether let's call it in their 60s, 70s, 80s, who do feel like the story's been written and there's really not much they could do to course correct.
So, I mean, at that point, going back to medical, you need to take a very detailed history and make sure that there's not any risk factors that would preclude them from any of our services. And some of the services they'll qualify for because they're not invasive, or they're not going on hormonal therapy, because at that age, how much testosterone is really going to change you. But there may be some erectile performance that we can help with. I hate to call it dysfunction. We like calling it performance or enhancement nowadays. But again, it's all informed decision making. If you look at the reviews at the Weston Clinic, the Aventura Clinic, the Boca Clinic, a lot of the patients will say, "Never felt like I was pushed into anything." It's always, these are your options, these are your risks, this is how we can help you. And it's patient centric. We're gonna do what you want safely. And I think that's something that really differentiates us from some of the places that you can kind of sort of walk into, and it's a store, and we're not that. We're a medical office.
Awesome.
We're a medical clinic.
Thank you both. I can't thank you both enough for taking the time out. This has been such an informative, fun discussion. I mean, look, it's a topic that, quite frankly, isn't talked about enough. That people, even shy away from reading up on sometimes. It may show up on your feed if you're a guy listening to this podcast, and perhaps you kind of whiz right through it because a lot of times you don't feel like you could relate to the guys that are talking about it. But I believe with both of your backgrounds, with regards to how you got here, what brought you into this space, in different ways, you're both extremely relatable. And I think that's the cool thing about this episode is the fact that you didn't wake up, at a young age saying this is what you were going to do. You had to get to a point where you realized there was a problem and they were individual problems. And then you leveraged your own backgrounds, Dr. Hal, your incredible background, professionally and academically, and Tyler from a professional lens and from a personal lens, you were able to bring them together to get to where you are today. And I think that's one of the really, really special things about this. So I just want to thank you both for coming on, for sharing your story, for informing us about GameDay. And I'm excited to get the word out for you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bishoy. We loved it.
You got it. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode of the Mile 40 podcast, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review, and share the word. Thank you for being a part of the Mile 40 family. And let's unite in showing the world that comebacks are always greater than setbacks.